Hey, real quick, I just wanted to let you know that you are listening to the best Veteran Army podcast of 2022, according to the Broken Jarhead platform. The reason why I was voted best is because of you. So thank you so much for voting, for listening, for subscribing, and for sharing with all your friends and family. Just make sure you keep on doing it, and I will keep on putting out some awesome content for you. Had a cool conversation with James Rogers. He's a strength and conditioning coach and member of the CAF. And trigger warning, he doesn't think we should be running very much in the combat arms. How dare he? All right, so this is a cool episode about strength and the realities of being in the combat arms and what we should be focusing on in terms of PT from his point of view. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Hard to Kill podcast, the go-to podcast for military, LEO, and EMS professionals, sharing ideas and experiences from around the world to make you hard to kill. Here's your host, Dave Morrow.
Well, folks, we've got James Rogers on the podcast today. He's a Canadian Armed Forces member, artillery officer, and has a really interesting perspective when it comes to training in the Canadian Armed Forces. James, welcome to the podcast, man. We've been having a really interesting chat before we even started recording, so I wanted to make sure that we get all this awesome info on the record. So let's start with, hey, man, like, I love that you wrote an article in Starting Strength. So before I even met you on Facebook, I knew about this article because somebody had forwarded it to me. I couldn't remember who, and it kind of exists in like CAF mythology right now about, hey, wasn't there this captain that wrote this article that like running sucks? So why don't we start right there, man? Like, we'll get right into the meat of it. What's the deal? How did you come up with this really well-written, well-researched article? And, where do you want to take it from here?
All right. Well, Dave, I just want to thank you for hosting me. So the genesis of this idea was, at the time, I was working as the training development officer for artillery courses. So what that means is for artillery courses, from gunner up to, say, master warrant officer for battery sergeant major, and also for officers from second lieutenant up to major, my job was to design those courses. And there's part of a process in that design process called validation, where you go and you say, okay, like, I've got all the things that I've taught these students, and we go out and we try and get a hold of students and find out, did you actually use this? So we go out and we determine, is this relevant? Are the things that we're doing, does it matter? Are we teaching people what they need to know? Are we getting them as ready as possible for the job? And that cued me to think, like, well, we're putting an enormous amount of time and effort into making sure, let's say, for a junior artillery officer, that they really know their command post procedures. It's very prescribed. This is a very strict and rigorous process that you have to follow to, train and then evaluate someone to make sure that they're good to go before they end up with a qualification in the military. At the same time, I noticed that we spend an enormous amount of time doing physical training, 1 hour a day, 5 days a week for almost everyone. That adds up. That's a lot of man hours. But that same rigorous thought process was not being applied. So I took upon myself to say, well, like, okay, I see lots of people going for runs. Is this valid? Does it matter? Is this supported by the tasks that we are training people to do? And in the end analysis, I came out to be that, no, it is not helpful. It does not support any tasks, any actual soldier tasks that we're training people to do. And also, it does come at a cost, which is probably in the end not helpful. And that we would be better served as an institution to focus primarily upon strength. And that improving the physical strength of our members early in their career to make them more like physically useful, and also have a byproduct to make them more physically resilient to injuries in the future. That essentially sums it up.
Yeah, that's a great analysis. And I want to just read something from your article here. So folks, if you're going to be able to find the article in the description here. It's called The Army's Running Problem. It's in Starting Strength by Captain James Rogers, published on the 27th of January, 2021. So you go on to say distance running is a popular PT method for a number of reasons. And I like these. It takes minimal effort or technical competence from leaders to plan and execute. Number two, it is pretty easy once you get used to it. 3, it can be justified by institutional history. 4, it makes chunky recruits lose a bunch of weight. And 5, the person leading PT has watched Band of Brothers too many times. Oh man, I can't tell you how many death runs I've been on with way too overconfident LTs, and I'm guilty of it myself. I'm a tall guy, and as soon as I was able to get my own section, my own platoon, well, I didn't know much about strength training. And so what did I know? Well, I could run. I was tall and I was skinny. So I was like, I'm going to run these guys into the ground because I know how to do that. And that is like endemic. So based on what you just said there, like how do we go about, and I guess the question is, why should we go from a running centric type PT model to a more strength based PT model?
Well, the primary reason for that is you will get a more useful soldier at the end of it. A strong soldier is more useful than a weak one. Running does not make you strong. It can't. If a physically strong person begins a running program, it is highly likely that they will lose some of the strength that they have, so they will become less useful. When I say strength, I'm referring to an individual's capacity to exert force against an external resistance. Does that kind of make sense? That's just what
physics-based explanation. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just straight up physics. Can you accelerate a mass?
Mm-hmm.
You apply more force to accelerate a bigger mass. That's literally it.
Hey, handsome. Did you know I'm gunning to be the #1 alternative health podcast in Canada, not just for veterans? That's already a given. I'm so close to cracking that top 100 spot, but I need your help. I need you to go rate, review, share this podcast, and make sure that this cracks the top 100, top 50, top 10. And let's get more veterans moving and grooving and feeling good because they get to hear all the awesome content with the incredible guests that come on this show. All right, that's it for me. Go do what you got to do. Love you. Bye.
But yeah, so if you look at running, it's actually fairly easy. It's not all that hard. It's hard because you do a lot of it, but it's not hard enough to drive a really serious adaptation to turn someone into like an animal, right? Like with all the courses that you've been on, have you ever seen someone come off of a course and just be like an absolute physical beast? Does that ever happen?
No.
Or do they come off courses being much diminished versions of themselves?
No, we all lose like 30 pounds.
Yeah. Okay, why is that? And is that good? If that's happening, is the training system producing the best possible product to return to the unit that needs to employ that person? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One thing that I think
noticed, it might be.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but like the physical toll being in the field and getting up every morning and going for a run or a ruck march, and that's phase training. Like case in point, like for Americans out there, I don't know what the equivalent is, but it's our like officer training at that basic level, right? It's hard. Like it's physically demanding. We're not eating enough, and there's no real time for recovery. So I know when I came home, I was about 20 pounds lighter, and that's I've lost a lot of muscle mass. I've definitely lost a lot of body fat, and if I come back and you could say like I'm effective, I realize now took months to recover, just to get my strength back, just to get my sleep back in order. So yeah, there's definitely a toll on the body there. So yeah, I'll let you carry on with your thought there.
Right. I think it's important to kind of separate out the difference between like training, practice, and performance. Does that kind of make sense? So the way we split it is you have training, which is like, this is the process where you apply, different physical stresses, you let the person recover, and then you apply the stress again in order to produce a change in the that person's biological makeup, right? So if I apply a training program to take a 20-year-old kid and add 300 pounds to his deadlift, he's going to look different. He can't not look different because he'll have gained probably about 40 pounds by the end of that process. If you take someone who's a couch potato, if you turn them into a marathon runner using a training plan, that person will look different, right? So that's what a training plan is. Then you have practice. Practice is developing skills. So it's important to keep this separate from training, right? Because training is the process where you apply specific physical stresses to an individual in order to achieve an end goal of different physical performance. And skills is something like weapons handling, right?
Right.
You don't want to mix those up, because if you just think about it, you're from the infantry. So let's say if when we want to make our infantry stronger. So when they're practicing their weapons handling, we're going to use rifles that are 5 times as heavy as they are. Now, does that make any sense?
No.
What effect would that have on their weapons handling skills?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be training the way you fight. You'd have a weapon that when you get the actual real thing wouldn't feel the same. You wouldn't have the same marksmanship principles wouldn't apply. Like they still would, but you would have just a totally different way of shooting your weapon. It just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, it's your ability to apply precise skills would be off if you mix up those two things, right? And this goes back to the military thing, in which we tend to mix up those two things. We tend to get training into our practice, which muddles them both up and messes them both up, right? And then to make it even worse, there's the performance aspect, right? Now, the performance when you're on course, that's your PO check. Does that make sense? It's what everything leads up to. Or, it could also be, say, when you're on an exercise, you need to do something, or if you're in a war. That's what the performance aspect is for military personnel. For a sports person, that's when you play the big game. That's the performance. The training and the skills developed in the practice lead to the performance. But in the military, we have a tendency to, I think, focus on performance all the time. It makes sense? It's like, I want you to give as much as you possibly can. It's like, well, that's not necessarily training. That's performance. And the problem with performance is that oftentimes it can be destructive. You'll damage someone if you perform all the time.
As in, always being in a state of evaluation will affect the individual in a negative sense, because they'll detrain themselves, because they might learn bad habits. They might do things that are not typically conducive to a good soldier, to a effective soldier. Is that where you're getting at?
Yeah. So it's so everything with training is based upon, the first thing you do when you train is you apply a stress, right? So you apply a stress that's big enough to sort of knock you out of whatever state that you currently are in. Let's say, last week for my squat workout, I did 435 for 3 sets of 5. Next week, I will do 445 for 3 sets of 5, because 435 is not a stress anymore. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So that's a stress. Then you need to have time to recover from that, and then you display an increased level of performance afterwards. Now, if you're going to have someone on a really hard course, like let's say a DP 1.1 infantry officer course, and if you're demanding the absolute top level performance out of that person day after day after day after day, you will see a decline in that person's capacity to perform, if there is no time off for that person to recover. It just cannot happen. This is a biological reality. You can't willpower your way through it. At the end of the day, we are a collection of sticks that are operated by strings, powered by chemistry. That's your body.
Right.
And
So the 2 days on the weekend that isn't sufficient after you've been going hard Monday to Friday.
well, no, especially if you're not sleeping very much. Like when I was the course officer for a PLQ AJLC, I only did PT with them 2 days a week. The other days I wanted them sleeping. And all we did for PT was hill sprints. And that was it.
Yeah.
And I had 0 visits to the MIR over the duration of the course. So, you as someone who's responsible for training other people, it is important to consider recovery time. And sometimes it's just time. Sometimes it's taking a day off and just giving your people time to sleep. So like resist the temptation to say, oh, we're going to go for a recovery run or we're going to do recovery stretch. Like, no. Better use of time is an extra hour of sleep. Sleep is probably the best thing you can do for that. But we're wandering.
Yeah, well, it's good you brought up sleep. I'm gonna pull you back to injury, but sleep concept is really, man, like that's something that I was always curious about. Like I understand that sleep is a way to impose stress without being in combat. It screws up your ability to think straight. It screws up a lot of things biochemically about you. So I get it to a certain extent, but I also found it a bit perplexing that when we're trying to learn, let's say, concepts in a classroom setting, and we're super sleep deprived and we're exhausted, you can't concentrate. You can't really absorb that information. And I always thought that was curious to train, quote unquote, new officers or new senior NCOs under such sleep deprived conditions for such a long period of time as a means to stress the individual so that it's harder. When in my opinion, I was an educator, I was a teacher. My students that were sleep deprived, it was an issue that I would bring up with the parents all the time because I'm like, they're dead tired. They can't concentrate. They're never going to be able to pass this course. They're sleeping in my class. It's already hard enough as a teenager. And I just thought that was really counterproductive and is a cultural thing, I think, here in Canada, that we just force that sleep dep on individuals as a means to like prove that you're tough enough. So I don't know if you can comment on that as like, is that something that culturally exists just because it's something we've always done? Or is there any real basis?
Probably a hangover from World War II.
Right. Okay.
It's one of these things. Is like, yeah, it's just how we've always done it. But it's like, well, okay, stop and think about what you're trying to do. Just stop and think, right? You're trying to teach right now. Your brain doesn't work properly on 5 hours of sleep or 4 hours of sleep for weeks on end. You get stupid. If you're wondering why the candidates are stupid, it's probably because they're sleep deprived. That's why they're stupid. Because right now, with the pool of recruits that we have access to, they're probably the best educated that they've ever been. We've never had better educated recruits. Unfortunately, with the with modern days, it's their level of physical resilience is quite low, probably compared to 30 years ago. Right. That's just a function of modern life. But they're smarter than they've ever been. Now, if you want to stress someone out and sleep deprive them in order to do the performance, as I was talking about before, you do that during the FTX. You do that during the confirmatory FTX, because you can test them there. You're not out there for that long. Like 7-9 days or so. That's not long enough to completely ruin someone. It is enough time to make them sort of loopy with sleep deprivation. But hopefully, if they've been getting enough sleep during the practice part of the course, they will have integrated the lessons that you've been trying to teach them so that they can perform in the field. So it's important to separate the practice and the training from the performance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, as a former instructor of recruits, I understood, compliance for an individual is a lot easier when they're sleep deprived. But you're right. At a certain point, you want them to understand what the hell's going on, and sleep depriving the crap out of them and not allowing them to recover probably leads to a higher rate of injury than is understood, or maybe it is understood. Maybe you can speak to that. So I want to point out the graph that you pointed out here, and I referenced this article and your graph in my seminar on running, and it's interesting because we're looking at rates of injury. I got it right here, like that school child soccer.
Yeah, so soccer is a bloodbath.
Yeah, the graph here, for those of you that are just listening, it's the multi-sport comparative injury rates. And on the y-axis, we have injuries per 100 participation hours. And then on the x-axis, you have the activity. And school child soccer rates at 6.2. After that, it's rugby at 1.92. Then basketball, then cross-country running. So actually, and it's 0.37. So actually it's a little bit higher than USA basketball. So, but all the way down at the very end of the list, we have Olympic weightlifting, which I think by my calculation, I think you mentioned it too, it's about 200 times less dangerous than cross-country running. So let's dive into that, man. What's going on here? How is it that when we go and we talk about, weightlifting and like, even if you want to call it CrossFit or like powerlifting, whatever, anything that involves a barbell and you either throwing it over your head or doing a clean or doing compound movements is almost seen as like verboten. Whereas running, that's okay. When clearly the data is we're getting injured running and not by lifting weights.
Well, it's because weightlifting looks scary.
Really?
Like, if you have you ever seen a video of me doing a heavy overhead press where I'm essentially folding myself in half backwards?
Yeah, man. Of course. Yeah. I see the comments. They're like, "Oh my God, watch for your back." I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure the guy knows what he's doing.
It's like my abs take care of it because, like, under this fluffy tummy that I have, there's probably a fairly large set of abs that are handling the weight just fine, right? Mm-hmm. My abs protect my back. So there's probably a few reasons why. Things like powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting, I'm just going to generically refer to those as strength training, right? Because those are both strength sports. It's like who's strongest. Olympic weightlifting is like who's better at throwing the heavy thing over your head, and for powerlifting, it's like who can push the heavy thing away from them or stand up with it or pick it up, right? So we're just called it strength training. Mm-hmm. And the reason that is relatively safer is that for one, the lifter is always going to select their own attempts. So the lifter is in control of what they're doing. Somebody else is not going to impose a weight, or should not be imposing a weight upon that person using an arbitrary measure. Also, those sports, they're technically demanding. So the instructor to student ratio will be lower. Does that make sense? You can take a group of 30 people for a run and not really pay attention, but you really should not be handling more than 3 lifters at once. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fussy details that need to be paid attention to make sure things are going correctly. And also with powerlifting, you can set up the equipment so that you're absolutely safe all the time. You can have you can set up the safety arms so you're always safe with bench pressing, and to catch you during the squat, and a deadlift that is heavy enough to hurt you will not come off the ground. So there are some built-in safety mechanisms. And also a lot of the training for those events, like you're not out there doing maximum attempts all the time, right? Like you are usually working in the sets of 5 or sets of 3 for at least the powerlifting stuff. And, usually like, I guess for the Olympic lifts, you'll do triples, doubles, and singles. That's the best way to train those things. But yeah, and also for for strength training stuff, especially for the Olympic lifts, the demands of the technical execution act as also a bit of a safety mechanism, because if you are trying to do something that is just way too heavy for you, you're not going to get it. Right. It will not go, so you're going to miss the lift, and that's it. Whereas if you're going for like a really long ruck march, you can have someone who's really struggling, but they can gut it out for a very, very, very long time, longer than they should.
Yeah, and they're incurring just a ton of soft tissue damage in the process.
Yeah, it's like I had a guy on my cap course. He did I think about 6 or 7 weeks of that course on a broken foot. All that stuff, he had a broken foot. He probably should not have been doing that course on a broken foot, but he did it anyway, right? It's with the, I guess, with sports with like kind of like lower thresholds of exertion, things like distance running and ruck marching, it's possible to kind of gut through an injury. Whereas with things like Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting, it's not going to go. It's a bad idea. If you are hurt, you need to stop immediately.
Yeah.
So
yes.
there's
so
a couple of built-in safety mechanisms.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Like, there's a lot of built-in safety mechanisms with your lifts, and I guess it's a cultural thing too, right? Just lifting in general. And if I go back to the early days of lifting, right? Who are the ones that popularized it? It was the 70s with the Schwarzenegger, right? That's where like the culture started, the bodybuilding culture. Yep. And I think there's a lot of hangovers from that, where it's like, well, if I'm going to lift, I'm going to get bulky, and it's like, well, wait a second, you're not going to be Mr. Olympia if you go to the gym and start doing 5x5s. Sorry, you're going to get stronger. You're going to feel better. You're going to have more resiliency, but you're also going to be better at your job. Like, I only found strength training really like 5-6 years ago, like if that. Well, maybe a little bit before, around the time I got back from tour, because I got hurt and I didn't really understand the mechanism of my injury. I didn't understand, because I was under the impression that I'm strong, I'm fit, like I can do pull-ups, I can run, I can do all the things I'm asked of as an infantier. But ultimately, like, I had no core stability. I was terrible on one leg. Like, just fundamental strength things sucked. And that's what was so great working with my coach. We broke it down. Like, we broke it down to the fundamentals, and I wasn't strong in a lot of different aspects. So with that being said, you also break down like critical tasks. Would you call it the MES, where like an individual trade has a certain amount of things they need to be able to do for their job. And the curious thing is, you did a lot of research for this. It's really cool. If you're just looking at an infantry soldier, there's no component of like a 10-kilometer run.
Nothing. It's just...
So, yeah, can you go into that a little bit and explain how you like broke all these things down?
Well, I don't have the qualification standard in front of me, but
right.
You can, if anybody's in the military, can go and look up on ASIMS. There's the AITA, which is the Army Individual Training Authority. You can go to that site. It's in the Combat Training Center ASIMS site. You can pull up any individual training plan, and you can look. You don't want the training plan. You want the qualification standard, which is the list of things that you need to be able to do once you're done that course. It could be for anything. It could be like for artillery, battery sergeant major. It could be for DP1 infantier. It could be for armored trooper, right?
Mm-hmm.
All those sorts of things. Like, this is what you need to be able to do to get this qualification. And what you do is you open that document and you look up something called the task list. And that's a big list of everything that you get taught to do on that course. And you can go down that list and say, okay, do I need to do a 10K for this? No. Will it help with this? No. It says here I have to program a radio. Does that help with that? No. Okay, it says here I need to operate a medium machine gun. Does that help with that? No. It says here I need to be able to clear trenches. Does it help with that? No. Okay, it says here I need to operate an outboard motor. Does it help with that? No. Like, all the way down. All right, I need to be able to load 155 millimeter ammunition for gunners. Does this help with that? No. And you can do this for any Army DP1 trade. I did it for all the big ones. So I did it for REME, signals, gunner, infantry, armored. I don't know if I forgot any. I didn't get into logistics because that's a purple trade, so it's kind of complicated for me.
Yeah. And
so I looked at it and it's like, well, at least on the NCM side, I didn't get in the officer side because that would have doubled my workload and I didn't want to do it. So it's like, I looked at it as like, yeah, there's nothing here to validate that says that these guys actually need to be running 10Ks. Like, do you to do your job, do you need to be able to have this ability? Now, if you're a competitive middle distance runner, then you need to be good at running 10Ks. That's your job. That's what you do if you're in track and field, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're not really like the Army's. It's not track and field. The Army is souped up construction work.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's if you want, you at the end of the day, it's like you want a bunch of guys who can get a truck unstuck from a ditch by hand, which involves shoving the truck out of the ditch by hand, right? And if I had the choice between like a bunch of guys who can, squat 165 with good 10Ks and a bunch of guys who can squat 405 with non-existent 10Ks, I'm going to take the guys who can squat 405 because they'll be able to shove the truck out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Does it kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Here, if you're just looking at the infantry breakdown that you have, total task 217, run a long distance slowly 0, manipulate heavy objects 110 tasks. Yeah. And as a former infantry NCO and officer, who was deployed, I mean, we did patrols that were longer than 10K, but I wasn't running them. I had 100 pounds of gear on.
Yeah.
I never, other than a slow shuffle to get to a new firing position, there was no long distance running. And we all know that intuitively, especially the guys that hate running, right? The more the more I was a mesomorph type, the more power lifter type individuals, like the football players that would come and join.
Yeah,
they hated running, and obviously they're built for speed. So you go for these 10K runs, and they'd be like, ugh. But throw them in the field, they're rock stars because they've just got a ton of muscle mass. They've got a ton of explosivity. They're good all around athletes. And the job in the field is totally different from what is in garrison. And there was always that mismatch. Now, to play devil's advocate, right? Mm-hmm. Going for a run, and you mentioned it too, right? It's simple, it's easy, it builds endurance.
Right.
At a fundamental level, is running one of the best ways then to just build that baseline of endurance? Or would you argue that no, we could go into the gym and slap you into a bar and build just as much cardiovascular endurance than if we went for a run?
All right, I'm going to evade that question by saying it depends.
Good. I like the discussion.
Okay, so let's say
you didn't fall for my trap.
I know. I recognize the trap. I'm going to evade it. I'm going to slip your snare.
What's the one exercise that a troop needs to do in order to be? I'm not going to do that one either.
All right. No, it's okay. So for running, if you have a utterly sedentary person, absolutely sedentary person, and if you do get that person under the bar doing a properly executed strength training program, their cardio ability will get better for a little bit. Okay. Now, strength training does not take care of giving someone really good cardio. It's going to have them be very good at putting out a tremendous amount of energy for about 30 seconds, and then they're going to be shot. Okay? That's what you get. So the way that you solve that problem is that you use periodization for your training program, in which you spend the bulk of your time training for strength to get stronger. And then before you need to go to do your performance, as I keep saying, that's when you introduce cardio. But you don't go for long distance runs. You use very short and sharp bouts of conditioning. So things like hill sprints, 200-meter sprints, 400-meter sprints, those sorts of things, not the long distance stuff, so that you're not accumulating a whole bunch of impacts which cause the running problems. So it's just essentially, you can boil it down as all right, you spend the first couple months just getting as strong as you can in a few months, which for a young man is actually a lot of progress. And then for a few weeks before you need to go into your performance, that's when you throw in the conditioning. So you have a strong person who's maybe 95% as strong as before you toss in the conditioning, because you can't have everything at once. You will lose a bit of that top end strength once you add in conditioning. But they're also going to have the gas tank to keep that thing going. So you just have to use periodization and planning. You don't train for strength and cardio at the same time. It'll screw it up because they are competing adaptations, right? Because if you look at a strong man and a 10K runner at the Olympic, or at least at the competitive level, they look very different. So if you're trying to do both those things at the same time, you have competing adaptations happening. So you're not going to progress like you would. But it is possible to, get someone strong. And then, since conditioning is primarily a chemical reaction that happens inside of your body, you don't need to add a whole bunch of tissue or, adapt your body that much. It's a chemical reaction that's happening that you're making more efficient. You can alter that fairly quickly in a couple of weeks. Because you remember from like when you're doing your basic level courses, you have like Private Stuffy, who's really struggling at the start. He puts his heart into it to kind of keep up on the runs. He really sucks at the beginning, but then he just like pulls his boots up or whatever, and at the end he still sucks, but he can keep up with the course now.
Right. Private Stuffy on the back. He's in pain. He hates it, but he's getting through it.
Yeah, right. That's what's happening. That's why conditioning comes on quickly and it leaves quickly. It's like a cat. It only cares if you feed it. Strength is like a dog; it's loyal.
I like that analogy, man. I think it's going to be the title of the podcast. Conditioning is like a cat.
You have to keep feeding it, right?
Right.
You can. It's like you have to you think all right, well, for the next say 12 weeks or so, I'm gonna lift and I'm gonna keep adding weight to the bar every time I lift, right? Then after that, it's like, well, okay, it's once you're done that, it's like, well, I need to go and do some sort of test or I'm about to go on course. You got like 4 weeks out or so. I'm going to back off the lifts a little bit and I'm going to start doing like sprints and things like that. So I can be ready for course and you're going to get there and nothing's going to bother you because you'll be strong and you'll have a good gas tank.
Yeah. I could say
that adequately answer the question about.
Absolutely, man.
Actually, no, I avoided that question because your original question was just because it's easy to do, that makes it the best option.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me come back with another question. Does easy work? Does easy work as well as hard?
No, obviously depends if you're doing hard stupid or hard smart.
Right.
You're doing hard smart.
Let's say we let's say for for officer training, let's make that course really easy. We're not gonna like make them think very hard when they're doing their range safety officer portion of the course. And it's like, yeah, we want that 100% pass rate. So let's make it really easy. Let's not challenge people. I understand that for strength training to go well, there is a certain degree of technical competence that needs to be applied, but we also teach teenagers, like in the military, we teach teenagers how to operate howitzers. So it's not too much of a leap to say we can't teach someone how to deadlift.
Yeah.
Let's give ourselves a bit more credit for our ability to teach people how to do stuff before you write off this whole if we the troopies will explode if we let them touch a barbell.
Yeah.
And even a improperly executed strength training plan will still produce a more useful soldier and a lower injury rate than a running heavy training plan. So
yeah, and I think that's the most important point to be made. Like, let's say you start and it's not well periodized. Maybe like the technical foundation isn't really there, but you've started. You're getting a grip. You're odds are, like you said, there's built-in safety mechanisms. Right. It's very hard to progress really fast with a lot of weight, let's say into like a clean and press or like a clean and jerk. Like, these aren't things that will just automatically be easy for somebody with 225 pounds over their head. Not going to happen. So they might be using some kettlebells and some dumbbells, and like their form might not be the greatest, but as they progress, they'll get a better mind-body connection. They'll have somebody there to be like, hey man, you know what? Fix this little thing, fix this, like, push your knees out, like do these little corrections. But the thing is, like, we're so hyper vigilant when it comes to, let's say, lifting and, the fear of like doing it wrong and hurting yourself, but we don't have the same fear or this same urge to correct poor running form, or just at the fundamental level, like, are you strong enough just to start running? Nobody asks that question, and that's why like the majority of injuries on military courses in the States and Australia, I don't know I haven't seen any data here in Canada. There might be, but it's all lower body injuries and shin splints and ankles, right? And it's that's just soft tissue not being able to stand up to the rigors of going for a run every day and then going and walking every day. So it has to be phased in, like these, like, I mean, having instructed, that's what I saw a lot too, right? It was always shin splints, shin splints, shin splints. Well, shin splints is something that you can prevent very easily. You just need to make sure that you have the system in place so that you don't drive these recruits out of the military, because I know, some kids got shin splints and eventually led to compound fractures or stress fractures, which is like the worst case scenario. And that's awful. Like, they could be a great soldier in the future. They just need to give them time in order for their tissue to catch up with the improvements and the accommodation and the adaptations. But that's not there. And that's the unfortunate reality, because you have a constricted time window to get these individuals trained up. And we're kind of stuck in that system, right?
Well, we'll help deal with that. I'll talk to you a bit about what I do when I was course officering for some reservist course that I had, because this is when I had things a bit more figured out. All of that I did with them. I just taught them how to squat, bench press, deadlift, and overhead press. That was all their PT was, just teaching them how to do it. Then towards the end of the course, I did okay, we're going to talk about programming. So I spent an hour okay, this is what programming is. This is how it works. This is how you get your lift, which is here, up to here in little 5-pound jumps. You just accumulate a bunch of those as fast as possible. And because you do that, you enable, that private Snuffy to go and train himself.
Yeah. Because trying to constantly be on top of everyone all the time, it just takes way too much contact hours. You end up into scheduling problems. You're depending on having an instructor be there all the time. So it's best just to get someone because you're on course already. You're already stressed out, right? You can't recover from a hard workout. So since you can't recover from a hard workout, there's no value in doing a hard workout. Does that make sense? Because if you can't recover from a hard workout, you will not realize an increase in performance. It's not going to happen. It's impossible. That's right.
So don't do it. Save yourself the injury problems. Like the person that showed up in course is the person that you got. We're just going to roll with it. We have 6 weeks here, right? Let's get on with it. What difference are you going to make in 6 weeks for someone who's sleeping 6 hours a night? Nothing. So don't waste time trying to beast the person into being better. Just roll with what you got. Teach them. Get them ready for a field. Off he goes, right? You're going to be assessed.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's much more measured approach.
If you teach someone how to train themselves, that person can go and train themselves. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not your problem anymore. It's that person's responsibility now to train themselves. And you can just walk away and say, all right, cool. Let me see your logbook in 6 months. Right? That's it.
Yeah, precisely. And like you said early on, we said early on, right? Sorry, yeah. We have some of the smartest recruits, like you said, coming into the forces right now, right?
Yeah.
These individuals, if you explain the why and you go, look, this is how you do it, they're smart enough to be like, oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And repeat. Be like, that's it. Yes. They'll take it and they'll run with it. They just literally don't know. So that's all. And so you're doing the right thing by just showing them the basics and then how to plan it out. And then they can take it themselves.
Well, the flip side to having the smart recruits now is they can see through bullshit.
Yeah. yeah.
You can't bullshit these guys. They're not stupid. They don't believe everything that you say just because you're in a position of authority. So don't bullshit people. You're going to get caught out. And it's going to decrease your own authority or your personal authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's but yeah, I think that there should be more rigorous strength standards that we sort of adhere to. It is within the ability of every young man to be able to deadlift 405 in about 6 months. Every young man should be able to do that. That's not even exceptional. That's baseline. If you're a young man, if you can deadlift 405, that means that you exist. It's not an astounding feat. It's very achievable. So why don't we get into that, right?
I can attest to it, having been a high school teacher. And, once we had a great gym. We had a really great gym, great setup. Mm-hmm. It was a private school setup, so we had the funding from private donors, which was great. And we had the coaches in the basement that were there after, every day the guys would come down, and you could see like the 15-year-old that like doesn't have much training, but he gets shown how to do a deadlift, and the athletic progress was outstanding because, man, they have so much testosterone. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Like these guys, like they were 17 and they were like ripping 405, and I'm like, holy shit! Like I said, I only started doing strength work when I was in my 30s. Like I barely touched any. I do push-ups and sit-ups. Like like that. That's not strength work. My high school gym, it was locked. We weren't allowed in because it was dangerous. We had it, but we weren't allowed in, even though we were athletes. That's the culture change that's happened. So definitely that 405 is elusive for me right now because I'm building. I never had it. So it's it's definitely a cool standard for a young man to be able to hit it. What other standards do you think? So yeah, go ahead.
For an older guy like yourself, it's a bit more difficult to get to that number, right? It'll take a bit more, like, I guess, concerted work and planning. And that's just that. But a young guy can get there fairly stupidly just by throwing more weight on the bar. And just like going for it. Like, I don't even remember how I got there. That's,
it's like, oh shit.
It's like,
how much is that?
It's like, okay, it's like just trying to like go back in the foggy depths of my memory. It's like, okay, was there a time that I could not like do this? Like, well, yeah, I suppose there was, but I don't remember how I got there. So it's like a big part of an important part of like, getting someone started correctly is getting like, okay, well, it's like, cool. Like for this, you're going to start with the empty bar. It's like, I don't care what you were doing before. We're starting with the empty bar. And we're going to find a weight that's appropriate for you. And that's, I guess that's a bit of it. It's important for like, I guess like just like basic decision making, understanding that everyone is in a different place. Everyone has different capacity to recover. Everyone has a different level of neuromuscular efficiency. So a person who's like really, really efficient, who's a very athletic person, can exhaust themselves a lot faster with lifting than someone who's not, right? Because that person who's really athletic can throw a whole lot more muscle mass, like a higher percentage of the muscle mass into the lifts than a non-athletic person can, because they're better at recruiting everything. That's what makes an athlete fast.
Right.
But that also means that they're more sensitive to overtraining. So it's just things like that, right?
Right.
How do you have to train women differently than men. And since we're trying to recruit large numbers of women into the military, in order to not, ruin them and break them haphazardly, because, well, for one, if you're going to take on the responsibility of recruiting someone into a job that is fundamentally dangerous, it's important to take responsibility to prepare that person properly. And that involves looking after that person's physical development, right? Because if you're going to have someone lugging around, 100-pound artillery shells, well, you need to take steps to make sure that that person can actually do it before you make them do it. It's just basic responsibility, right? If you're going to load someone up with 100 pounds of kit, you need to be responsible for making sure that that person is prepared to handle that weight by having them handle a much heavier weight before. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But yeah, I'm drifting. I'm telling people what they should be doing.
But you know what? At a fundamental level, the training, and at least I'm talking from my experience on pre-training, did not reflect the realities of what I needed to be able to do when I was in the field. We did ruck marches, sure. We did FTXs, sure. But at no point did we simulate me with all my gear going over walls, dropping down off of walls. Now, can you simulate it that well in training? Maybe not. But the conditioning side and the strength side, that wasn't ever focused on. So I knew I had to do that on my own. And that's where I started going to the gym. I just started doing squats and deadlifts because I was like, well, soldiering's in the legs. I knew from my earlier days when I trained my legs, like when I went on PLQ, I felt really good. Like I was like, wow, these section attacks aren't as hard as they used to be. Like, I guess it's because my legs are stronger. And it wasn't because I ran more. I just did more lifting. And that was always in the back of my mind. Now there's the research and the experience and guys like you that, make this clear or clearer. So, a lot of insightful stuff here, James. let's just chat about your Master Strength group very quickly, because I love what you're doing there. What is it, and what do you got going on in the Facebook group?
All right, so for my post-military career, it's coming up in a couple months now. I'll be focusing on doing coaching. I'm going to focus on people over 40. I'm going to focus on making people over 40 strong, because people over 40 need to be strong in order to enjoy quality of life. Does that make sense?
100%.
Because it's being strong is not something that you can take for granted, especially for the general population, for people who, work in sedentary jobs. Being weak and old will ruin your life, because you'll be frail. You'll be afraid of getting broken. So, and also people over 40 is a good client base for coaching and training, because, well, that's the people who have money right now. And also they have schedule flexibility, which is good for me, because I've got kids and I don't want to work at 5 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock at night. Right. So there's also that, but it's a Facebook group that I'm putting together. I want to focus on people over 40, getting them strong, because that's who benefits the most. But also, it's the process of getting strong in an efficient and safe manner. It demands, technical supervision, and also someone to manage the programming. In order to make myself better at that, I'm currently undertaking a starting strength coach preparation course, which is the certification that starting strength that you can challenge for. I'll be working on it for a couple months, and it is a very kind of like practical experience heavy certification. So I'm working online with that right now. Essentially what I'm doing is I'll be working with someone. I'll take video of myself coaching with that person. Then I'll submit that video to my mentor, who gives me feedback on it to make me better. I'll be doing that for the next couple months.
From what I understand, the starting strength qualification is very, very rigorous. And that's Mark Ripetoe's company. Yeah,
that's his certification. Well, I mean, he's not involved in the certification process anymore. He's handed it off. Yeah. So it's actually kind of like I guess it's best compared to a medieval guild, in that nice. They're not going to let you in unless you're good enough.
All right.
And also, they don't want to hand this thing out very much, because it dilutes the value of it. Because right now there's about 180 or so people who actually hold the certification, right?
Oh, wow. That's it.
In the world. And there's only one other one in Canada. So, but also it's a very high mark, or at least it's a recognition of a very high standard of like coaching ability, and also of like knowledge background when it comes to, just general physics, general physiology, and programming, and the ability to explain this stuff. So the end state that I like to get to when I'm through this is to be able to hold a conversation with someone who's in grade 9, and also with someone who is a orthopedic surgeon, explaining how lifts work without sounding foolish.
I love it. It's a really good objective.
And I also want to be able to, like the other goals, I want to be able to get a 75-year-old woman squatting to depth in about 10 minutes properly.
Nice.
So that's sort of the standard of what they're trying to get, right? Same deal with like deadlifts and overhead presses and things like that. So
that's awesome.
The goal is to get very, very, very good at coaching, like 5 or 6 particular lifts. And that's it. That's all you really need to do, like 5 or 6 things. You just get better at them.
Beauty. Yeah, the world needs a lot more strength coaches. There's definitely never going to be you're never going to reach a limit, because it's definitely something that, at least from what I've seen, right? The need for strength, the need for just the perception or the awareness of longevity through strength is something that needs to be very well understood, and you need to have the individuals like yourself that are going to be able to train those folks. So very noble of you to get into that space too, and share your knowledge. So I'll definitely put the link there for folks to go find the Facebook group, and to your articles as well. So James, this about wraps it up, man. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I'd just like to thank you for hosting me and taking the time, and we'll probably talk to you later if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks,
we should do an old guy programming episode.
Oh,
So how to program
crush.
for old guys without killing them.
we crush. I think that's a great idea. Folks, if you're unaware, James is a member of my Facebook group as well, the Veterans Getting Leaner and Fitter and Harder to Kill. So you can come join that group as well. And we have active conversations there. And James is actually coaching my adversary. We're having a little deadlift competition, a friendly deadlift competition. We're both guys over in our 40s trying to get to that elusive 405 that we just talked about. So definitely head over there if you're interested in having some friendly competition. So James, thanks so much for giving us your insights. And folks, don't forget, train hard, fight easy. See you on the next one. Peace.